There are a lot of spots where even good advanced regs tend to make the wrong decision. Take a situation like this where you have 7-6 suited. Flop is Jack 5-4 rainbow, in a single raise pot action goes check check, turn is an ace. What are you doing here? Are you checking or are you betting? And if you do bet, for what size? Let's talk about where a lot of regs tend to go wrong in this exact spot. Good morning, how we doing today? My name is James Sweeney, aka Split Suit, and today I want to talk about this spot with you. And not just the turn decision, but also all the decisions leading up to it. And with that said, let's start from pre-flop and look at this spot. So here we're looking at a very common 6-max scenario. It folds around to the button, who open raises to 2.5 big blinds, totally standard. Small blind folds, and here you are in the big blind with 7-6 suited. Now do note that because we are specifically in the big blind, 3-betting with suited connectors is highly attractive. Now if you look at this spot through preflop GTO ranges, you're going to find the highest frequency action is going to be to 3-bet 7-6 suited here, and depending on exactly which ranges you're looking at, you're going to typically find some mix of calling going on, usually somewhere between 20 and 40%. So it's not like 3-betting is extremely rare by any stretch, or that flatting is not supposed to happen some chunk of the time here. Now, of course, the strongest decision you can make here is going to be dependent on information you have on your opponent. If you know your opponent is, say, the type of person who's going to overfold against 3-bets way too often, then I wouldn't even put anything into my flatting with 7-6 suited here. It would just be all 3-bets, just take advantage of the fact that they overfold and just make an exploitative adjustment from there. However, in this exact situation, we don't have great information on the button, and it's also a spot where a lot of players just tend to call very comfortably anyway and go forward from there. So let's run the hand going that direction. Instead of making this a 3-bet pot, this will just be a single raise pot. Now once we make that call and close the action pre-flop, the flop ends up coming Jack 5-4 rainbow, not giving us a backdoor flush draw. We decide to check and the button checks behind. Now a lot of players will just simply breeze right past the flop here. They might take a little note that hey, the button didn't decide to c-bet here, but a lot of the time they just breeze right past it because it's very typical and common to just check to the pre-flop aggressor. But this is a situation where it makes a lot of sense to at least consider donk betting and just leading into the preflop aggressor instead. Now of course there are a lot of different textures where the solver is just going to suggest that you check 100% of the time, no problems, but when we look at this specific texture, the fact that we have a lower lone high card, the jack in this spot, and the low coordination between the 4 and the 5 gives us some clues that some donk betting should be taking place even if the frequency is relatively low. Now in general, flop donking ranges tend to be very mixed, so hands just like the ones we have here, 7-6 suited, will tend to make the cut with some frequency. And while this low frequency of donk bets barely affects the theoretical EV, exploitative players tend to be aware of the unbalancing effect a flop donk bet can have on villain. Most opponents are far less skilled when facing a flop donk bet rather than a check, and they simply don't expect to face a flop donk bet from a regular, and as such they're kind of out of their comfort zone, as opposed to when you check to them, they expect that 100% of the time, they get a little bit unwieldy when all of a sudden you're donk betting into them and they don't really exactly know what to do. They're probably going to play against your checks much better than when they play against your donks. Now Hero did decide to check in this situation, and most players are honestly going to check a lot in this spot. Even the solver is going to check with 7-6 suited a decent chunk. The donking is just going to be a mix. So with that said, let's continue on to the turn, which is the ace of clubs. Now a lot of players would correctly look at the ace on the turn and say this is definitely going to be better for the aggressor. It's going to hit more of the hands that they would check behind with on the flop, and as such that's not great for us, and as such it should result in a pretty low frequency of turn probe bets. But despite this, the turned ace is actually very interesting. It gives us a robust equity advantage in the nutted region, simply because we have more combinations of hands like ace jack, pocket 5s, pocket 4s. In some preflop GTO solves you're even going to find some 3 deuce suited combinations in our range here, and as such that's all much better than the kind of hands that the villain is going to have in their range right this moment. Now the big takeaway you can get from this is that the nutted equity advantage means that we can make use of overbet sizings on the turn probe bet, even if the overall betting frequency is low. And if you take this spot and run it through a solver, what you're going to notice is that the model reveals a massive 250% pot turn probe bet used at an 11% frequency. Almost everything else is going to be played as a check. And of course, like any aggressive action the solver makes, there's going to be value hands and also a mixture of either bluffs and or semi-bluffs. And in this situation, our 7-6 suited is potentially the best draw in our range, being an open-ended straight draw to the nuts. bets. The solver is actually going to overbet this combo close to 100% frequency, which is actually pretty impressive. Now, with all that being said, you don't have to panic if in real time you wouldn't find the 250% pot bet on the turn here. That's totally okay and normal. Someone who's been doing some GTO study might bet 120% pot on the turn here, which is very, very reasonable. But if you look at this spot and you never see an opportunity to turn probe, if you never consider the overbetting as an option, especially when you're looking at things like nugget equity distribution, then I'd say you're missing something as it comes to trying to implement some GTO concepts into your actual game and understanding GTO strategies from any point of view. So if instead of firing this overbet and getting your opponent to fold, you end up default checking in a situation, facing a bet that you hate life with, and probably end up check folding if the bet's too large, then I would highly, highly suggest checking out my new book, GTO Gems 2. This book goes into a lot more depth across a lot of the concepts we've talked about in this video, which includes preflop, talking about things like big blind defense, GTO 3-betting, talks about things like flop play, bet sizing, especially looking for overbet sizing opportunities, understanding when those actually apply and get implemented, looking at things like playing as the defender, playing marginal hands, and much more. If you're ready to wrap your head around intermediate to advanced GTO play, pick up your copy of GTO Gems 2 today. Just visit gtogems.com/2 or click the link in the description box to learn more, pick up your copy, and also look on Amazon if you want the paperback. But with all that said, I think this is a good place to put a pin in it for this one. If you have any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to let me know, leave a comment, and if you learned anything, a thumbs up on the video would be massively, massively appreciated. Otherwise, I'll see you back shortly with a brand new video. In the meantime, good luck out there and happy grinding.